Hello, I'm Chief Meteorologist Scott Connell. Welcome to the 2024 Weather Impact Winter Preview. A new season and a renewed sense of optimism for snow and winter, at least for those that love the cold weather. Or perhaps it's dread for the long, cold months ahead. You know, here in the bi-state region, we can have some really major temperature and precipitation swings upon us as these days get shorter. So what can we expect this winter season? Well, let's start with where we should be each month, as Weather Impact meteorologist Gary Frank breaks down our averages.
As we look ahead to the winter season, we kind of know what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to snow, it's supposed to get cold, but not all the time do those things happen here in the St. Louis area and the bi-state region. But for the most part, it's been on the warm side this year, right? But I do want to talk first about what we should expect, right? Let's get a refresher course. Let's talk about each individual month. First and foremost, winter's getting closer. And as we kind of do every time I talk about one of these things, we go into depth about the seasons. Winter is near. Meteorological winter, those are for record purposes. If you hear us throw that term out, it's kind of an inside baseball thing, but it really has to do with the record purposes. It's December, it's January, it's February. And for this exercise specifically, that's what I'm going to talk about when it comes to winter. That allows us to put the statistics in a month-by-month category, simply because the winter solstice, which is December 21st this year at 3:19 a.m., our shortest daylight day, changes every year. It's not always at that exact time or that exact date. So as a result, because of the Earth movement and rotation around the sun, we keep it in the 3-month period just for record purposes, right? So, and obviously we also know that December 1st, it's cold still, right? We don't wait till December 21st, but as a result, let's talk about December 1st first as we look at what's ahead. Our averages in December, our temperature is 36.5 on average. Our precipitation is about 2.5 inches of liquid, and our snowfall is about just over 3 inches. Now, we have to quantify that liquid precipitation as opposed to sometimes we don't have to do that, right? It's just usually precipitation, because anytime we get snow, whatever that melts to adds to both of those totals. So we kind of have to quantify that as well. When we're talking about what's going on in January, this is our coldest month, right? We feel that for the most part. Our average temperature is right above freezing, and just precipitation just over 2.5 inches of liquid, and snowfall just shy of 6 inches. This is our coldest month. This is our snowiest month on average. That's when we typically are like, if we can get through January and just get over the hump and get into February, it's at least warmer on the tail end of the month, despite some of those extremes that still come into play, because our average 36.7, our precipitation just shy of 2.25 inches, and our snowfall is just over 4 inches. That is obviously still a cold month, but keep in mind, last February, if I need a refresher, which we'll talk about here in a couple weeks on the entire year refresher, if you want to talk about what happened snowfall-wise in February, it wasn't impressive. It was in the 80s a couple of times last February. This has not been a cold year for us, but here's what we expect. When you add all those numbers together, our average snowfall is about 16.6 inches just in the St. Louis area. And we look at all of these averages. This, I know, it snowed more than that outside of the city at times. This is the average in St. Louis. We use St. Louis as a metric simply because the records go all the way back to 1874 for temperature and precipitation, not necessarily snowfall, and there are some missing dates here and there, but for the St. Louis region as a whole, 1874 is our number. Every time I bring you some of these statistics, that's the number we're looking at. So, what are we looking at right now? I just talked about how warm it's been, and we show you our warmest years on record in St. Louis. And from the time that I'm talking to you about this right now, in the middle of November when I tape this, right now we're sitting at number 2 in 2024, with our average temperature throughout the year being 63.8. That's just shy of 2012. And you may say, well, 2012, that's a number that sticks out to me because it was so hot. I know I didn't live here in 2012, but in St. Louis, everybody remembers 2012. If I talk to them, they go, I remember 2012. It was hot. It was humid. We got over 104. We had 108 a couple of times. We had a couple of mornings that were in the mid-80s to start the day. So why is 2024 like that? Go, oh, yeah, I remember it was really hot. We got to 103, and I could just ballpark that off the top of my head. I remember that was our hottest day. It wasn't all that hot. What was warm, though, last winter. And that's why we talk about this more specifically, because we had some warm days in the afternoon each winter. We didn't have much snow. We had about 9 inches of snow in the St. Louis region. And so when you're talking about this, we also had some warm mornings, and I think that's what we really see. So are we going to see that this season? The reason I mention that, because the Climate Prediction Center outlook tells us from December, January, February, really has us under an equal chance, right? It's warmer to the south, it's cooler to the north. And you also look at the seasonal temperature outlook plus precipitation outlook in December, January, and February, and it has a couple of spots highlighted for above average precipitation in the Great Lakes, in the Pacific Northwest, and much drier to the south. Well, what does that mean for us? We really are not involved in any of those. We're kind of on the edge of that. And a lot of these Climate Prediction Center outlooks have to do with La Nina and the potential for La Nina to develop. And we talk, as you'll hear from the Missouri State climatologist, as kind of an idea of what does that mean for Missouri and Illinois and the entire Midwest as we continue to see these ups and downs. And that's what these climate scientists are looking at. But it may not always line up to what we think with. And that's what you're going to look at here coming up here over the next few minutes of this special and this outlook for winter, because each and every one of our weather impact team of meteorologists has an idea of what we are going to expect. And of course, you can look ahead to that. More information about winter perhaps you didn't know, with statistics and other things. And also, you'll get a guess on what we can expect for our snowfall total and coldest temperature from the rest of our weather impact team of meteorologists.
I'm meteorologist Anthony Slaughter. Last winter, we focused on an El Nino pattern that was developing here across the bi-state as we went into our winter months. That typically brings us warm and dry weather. And well, that ended up coming to fruition. We ended up with the 5th warmest winter on record, but pretty average in terms of precipitation. But the last couple of months have brought us extremes, almost a month in October with no rain at all, and then 2 months worth of rain in a 24-hour period. And as we look at our trends this winter, the La Nina pattern seems to be developing. And well, what does that mean for us here in St. Louis?
Yeah, Zach Leeser, state climatologist with the University of Missouri.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, Zach. I'll just kind of get right into it. We're just kind of doing a winter outlook for obviously our bi-state area, and that obviously a big part of that is Missouri. And the first thing everybody wants to know is, are we going to have more snow, less snow? What kind of winter outlook do we just see? Just the bottom line, before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, what do we think is going to happen this winter that makes it different from the winters past?
Yeah, well, right now I would say roughly we're looking at probably closer to average precipitation, with the chance for warmer temperatures right now, but with a lot of uncertainty in that forecast. So that's kind of my overall thoughts.
Well, so obviously the overall thoughts, start off with the fact that it seems like we can't get into any sort of normalcy. We go from anytime we think we're normal, we can even go back all the way to last January, and I can just recall it without even pulling the numbers up, just because I follow along in some of this nerdy stuff as well. The fact that it was incredibly dry, and then all of a sudden in a 3-week period for the first 3 weeks of January, we got all of our precipitation, and it was rain, right? So then we got all that precipitation, and then it got dry again, and it got really dry and it got really hot for the first part of February with our numbers in the 80s. As we even look throughout the rest of the year, as we go back and forth from drought to surplus, what does that mean for just some of the vegetation and just some of the things that are used to being normal? And I'm not saying that locally we've had a frost, but we still have not hit 32 degrees as the time of this interview in St. Louis, which November 27th is our record. And there's a couple of days over the next 2 weeks that we got an opportunity. Otherwise, it feels like we may not see it the rest of the month of November.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right about the roller coaster of weather we've seen this year. If we look at the state's average precipitation from January through October, we're about normal for the year, but that doesn't tell the story, as you've mentioned, because we've had multiple periods of too much rain at once in January, drying out in February and March. Then we were wet again in April through July, and then a full-on drought that we experienced across the state from April through October. We've seen all this rainfall in the last week of October and really the first couple weeks of November, and the wetter patterns really helped with the drought. But as you mentioned, now we've kind of seen this warming pattern since the last couple weeks of October and now into November. And so the areas that saw that first frost halfway through October, that was pretty much right on schedule for central Missouri, but now we've kind of paused and not really cooled down as we've gone into November and are getting closer to the winter. And so that kind of adds a little bit of complexity to the forecast because we're seeing a trend here where since August, we're seeing temperatures warming relative to normal. And overall, so far throughout the year, despite some cooler periods, it's still on pace for the third warmest year on record in Missouri. So we've got this really warm trend to also account for when looking ahead.
Just to kind of to piggyback what you said you were talking about the top three. You're looking for a top three warm year here in Missouri. We're on pace for the second warmest right now. It may be up to number one right now in St. Louis. So, for those trends the last few years, we obviously look at some of the obvious trends as we head into the winter months for preparation. Of course, last year we were looking at El Nino. This year we're looking at La Nina, although things may start to vary as we head into the winter. Let's talk about typically inform everyone what La Nina typically means for our area and what you're seeing from that as we head into the next few months.
Yeah, so when we think about La Nina in Missouri and really the central United States, typically during those La Nina years, we see a colder air across the north central United States. And so this typically can include Missouri as well, where we see some colder winters. And then a really defining characteristic of La Nina is also warmer temperatures to our south and drier conditions to our south as well. And so the signal for La Nina for precipitation can be a little bit mixed, where we've had wet and dry years, but certainly more of a signal for cooler temperatures. And the reason we're really watching this La Nina is El Nino did a great job in predicting at least temperatures for last winter. We had a very strong El Nino event that's characterized by warm temperatures across the north central United States. And we saw in Missouri, besides the couple of weeks in January where we got very cold, it was a very mild winter. And so we'll be watching La Nina to see if that can help with the forecast. But I also want to note it's a much weaker La Nina than what we were watching with El Nino. And in fact, I've been saying that this La Nina event has been kind of dragging its feet. We've been in what's called ENSO neutral, where sea surface temperatures are pretty close to normal. And while we've been really predicting those temperatures to start to cool all fall, it's really taken a lot longer than expected. And so our kind of probabilities are a little bit lower for La Nina. It's still in the forecast, but not guaranteed. And if that La Nina occurs, it may be a weak La Nina. And so this kind of reduces some of our confidence in going with the La Nina forecast and adds to some of that uncertainty as well.
Now that we get into those last few years, like you said, we've seen these roller coasters, we've seen more unpredictability as we head into these winter and fall seasons or early spring seasons. Do you think that these signals are perhaps as guaranteed as maybe they once were, or are they defined by, like you mentioned, they really need to be on the stronger side to be more of a typical La Nina or El Nino forecast for us that season?
Yeah, so the strength of La Nina or El Nino doesn't always correlate to stronger impacts, for example. But generally, if we do see a stronger event, we've got more confidence in how long that event will last and some of those impacts as well. And so I think the big thing now is with the forecast for a weak La Nina, it could only really be in that La Nina phase for a few months or a little over a season. And so is that long enough for the atmosphere to really respond to those sea surface temperatures and us to see those impacts? And so, yeah, I think that's some of the challenges with forecasting a weaker event is that we really don't know which way it could go.
We talk about snow and we expect cold air. Does that provide any? It feels like the last few times we get lulled into a November or December or January where it's pretty warm for a while, and we see these late season really cold surges. Is that something that with when we have the warm extremes, does it balance out with the colder extremes? Are we seeing more of that recently? Because it always feels like, hey, we have 80s, but then also we have 10 below out of nowhere. But 3 days later it's 45. Are we starting to see more of the not only we listen to the people talk about polar vortex as the bigger buzzword, but are we seeing more movement of that as we have the blocking high of the La Nina to the west? As that moves, are we going to see things like that versus El Nino? Do you think that you see any of those trends over the last few years?
Yeah, really, really good question because I think that characterizes our winters very well, where we're having cold periods, but when we look at them statistically, they get washed out by overwhelming mild conditions throughout the winter. And so if we look at the past 15 years or so, a lot of these winters are, top 10 on record for the state of Missouri. And so it's interesting where, as you mentioned, we've spent a lot of time over the past few decades learning about El Nino and La Nina and the impacts and the forecast skill they give us for things like a winter forecast. But now we've got this trend too that we can't ignore in the forecast. And then a lot of our cold has come from these stratospheric warming or polar vortex events. And so we can't just look at El Nino or La Nina for the forecast for those reasons. And so I think it's made it a little bit more tricky to predict. But it does certainly feel already like we're pretty similar to last winter, where the rest of November looks pretty warm. I'd expect that to continue into December, and then we kind of wait for the cold at that point.
And that's what I'm thinking. And I think maybe that when we transition from our talk of snow and we're trying to think of when we get the first inch of snow, and I don't know that we're going to get that this year. I mean, if we can't even get to 32, right? But as we just talked about, we had days ago, we had tornado watch in November, which it to some degree isn't out of the question, right? There's a second severe weather season in the South and maybe not necessarily impacting Missouri quite as much, but in the La Nina years when that warm, moist air maybe huddles to the south a little bit, do you see more of a severe weather threat on some of those years at all? And maybe that doesn't necessarily impact our areas in the bi-state and the Midwest, but maybe it does?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't have an exact answer here, but you'd also have to consider, there is warmer temperatures along the southern plains and Gulf Coast during these La Nina years, but also you kind of get a dry signal too, where there can be some high pressure in that area. So you could really see a counteract where you've got the warmer conditions that would set up for a big Southeast U.S. severe weather season, but you could also have the dryness where you don't have enough systems moving through to allow that air to kind of pile up. So I'd say, again, kind of maybe a mixed forecast on that southern severe weather. But yes, usually those impacts are farther south from Missouri.
I'm meteorologist Jim Castillo. While we've generally had a lack of cold air throughout the United States so far this season, we know it's going to get cold at some point. Now, before we had computer models and loads of historical data, we took stock in folklore to predict the seasons. One of the most common is the woolly worm caterpillar, but does it actually predict anything? Meteorologist Tracy Henson spoke to the experts to find out.
They certainly look fuzzy and warm.
A lot of insects that survive the winters are very good at producing antifreeze-like compounds. They've actually shown that the woolly worm can survive up to 90 degrees below zero.
So that fluffy exterior doesn't translate to warm, but the folklore around the crawler sometimes does. But before we get to that, meet Tad, senior entomologist at the Butterfly House.
Tarantulas here, these are all tarantulas.
He is definitely an expert in all things insect.
This is a new species. This is the largest species of black widow in the entire world.
Who better to ask about the science of the woolly worm?
I think the woolly bear reminds everyone of their childhood. Yes, everybody spends those late summer days and early fall days outside playing in the leaves and in the grass. That's where you see the woolly bear caterpillars.
We didn't find any, but we didn't look too long.
And it is in the same family.
If we did, fans of winter would hope for an all-black one.
The legend has it that the more black on the caterpillar, the worse the winter.
The more brown, the milder the winter. Now, if there was a scientific reason for that, Tad would know.
There's not too much science to this. Unfortunately, the caterpillars tend to get more brown the older they get. And so if you take a caterpillar that has a little bit of brown and you wait a few weeks and it molts again as it gets bigger, it might have even more brown.
And not once did you hear him call it a worm.
They're actually the caterpillar of a native moth species.
While this isn't an Isabella tiger moth, it's a beautiful blue morpho, but it's a good reminder that like all caterpillars, the woolly worm will eventually turn into a beautiful flying insect.
Tracy Henson, 5 on your side.
I'm meteorologist Tracy Henson. One of the more common questions we get every winter season seems to be, well, I wonder how much snow this would have been. That's because it has generally been on the warm side, but the temperature has quite a lot to do with it. The typical ratio for snow to liquid water is about 10-to-1, meaning that for every inch of liquid precipitation, you would expect about 10 inches of snow. However, this ratio can vary significantly depending on several factors, including temperature, humidity, and the type of snowflakes. But that all can change if it's slightly warmer or colder, as you can see here. So temperatures closer to the surface are above freezing. You'll get more of that wet snow that is packable characteristics. It's harder to shovel, and 5 inches of this snow may only lead to 1 inch of liquid water. As we get that colder air settling in, this is the snow that you may easily brush away from your car, use a leaf blower to get out of the way, or blows around on the interstate and becomes problematic as it blows across the road. 20 inches of snow here may only lead to 1 inch of water in this case. Many of these factors are why it's so difficult to forecast snow at times. Dry air, storm intensity, and locally higher surges of moisture can really make an impact on how much or how little snow we receive.
Well, no matter what the woolly worm says or how La Nina gets stronger or doesn't through the course of the winter, we know we're getting colder. It happens every winter. It's just a matter of how cold. And not only how cold at the ground, but how cold is it aloft when we start mixing some moisture with that? It's a complicated process. When the air is warm enough, especially close to the ground and up for a good distance, a few thousand feet up into the air, any snowflakes that are flying out of those clouds will melt, and we end up with just plain old rain. But you bring in a little bit of cold air, especially near the surface, and that rain will freeze, but it's still liquid when it hits the ground. Freezes on contact, that's freezing rain. Things get slick and sloppy in a hurry in those situations. Now, if we take that warmer air, squeeze it up, make that layer a little thinner, more like a little layer of icing in a cake, then the chances of seeing freezing rain go down and the chances for sleet go up. Sleet, ice pellets, because those raindrops have a chance to refreeze into those little balls of ice. When we take the temperatures and take the warm air out, and so it's below freezing from the clouds to the ground, then we get snow. The problem with that is in St. Louis, inevitably, somewhere pretty close by, there's always somewhere in these 5,000 feet above our heads, a little bubble of warm air just trying to nudge in, and that wedge complicates our forecast.
Now, in terms of my outlook for the upcoming winter, extremes seem to be the new norm. I mean, if you think about our last spring and summer, we had a lot of dry time, and then all of a sudden, every now and again, we had really heavy rainfall events. Same deal with our temperatures. And so as we go into winter, I think that's going to be the trend when it comes to these big swings in temperature, warm, mild days followed by extreme Arctic outbreaks, and also same deal with precipitation. Probably weeks without anything, and then all of a sudden the skies just open up. And so that's what I think we're going to be watching as we head towards this upcoming winter. Coldest temperature last year was pretty mild. I think we're going to be a little colder this year with that La Nina pattern setting up. And of course, well, we've already seen numbers that have gone up and down as we went through summer. Extreme hot followed by extreme cold. And so I think that is going to be the trend again. I'm going -13 for our coldest temperature this year. And as far as snowfall amounts, well, we have had a very mild last few winter months, and I think things are going to change this year. We're talking snowfall total, my prediction, 18 inches for the entire season.
Hi, meteorologist Jim Castillo here, and the prediction for winter, just like last year, we had hardly any Arctic intrusions across the area. So a mild winter, but we will have some cold moments. As we know, we eventually do get winter. But warmer than average, or mild is what we say, and then below average snowfall, but still predicting maybe a little bit more than last year's 3 inches. I'm going for 11 inches of snow, and the coldest reading, probably about 11. Can you tell I like the number 11?
Alrighty, here's my outlook for this winter. Well, I really do want to forecast drastically cold temperatures so that we can ice skate on our area ponds, and I want to forecast a ton of snow so the ski resort at Hidden Valley has a great season. I just don't think we're going to have it. So I think we're going to have an early December snow day, maybe one or two, couple of early December snow days. I do think we're going to have a warm Christmas, and I think our coldest temperature, I was kind of channeling my inner Adrian Monk here. Minus 10 degrees would be our coldest temperature that I'm forecasting, and then I'm going to go with another even 10 for our total snowfall.
Well, it looks like we're seeing a trend there, right? We've got some 10s, we've got some 11s, even got an Adrian Monk reference in there. However, I wanted to pass along Scott's outlook first before I get to mine, and then kind of the team's guess as a whole. Scott had a similar thought to Anthony, the fact that the extremes seem to be the new normal with the big swings in temperature and precipitation. But he wanted to stress the fact that there is a big time lack of snow, even though I'm the messenger. So, just keep that in mind right now. The coldest temperature Scott guessed would be 1 below 0, which is an improvement from last year. And our total snowfall at about 9.5 inches, which is really not all that different from what we saw last year. Now, when it comes to my prediction, it's a little bit different because, I think that there's no reason to believe that it won't be warm. We have been warm the entire year. We have been warm the last 2 years. That doesn't mean it's not going to be cold in periods like everyone else is saying. We kind of get into these ruts where we're warm for a while and then all of a sudden it gets cold briefly, but 2-3 days down the road, we don't have a significant snowpack for a while. So I just don't believe there's any reason that will change. One thing that you noted, if you saw Zach's interview, if you're kind of watching this on the tail end or you fast forwarded to where our snow predictions are, take a look at what Zach said about how the La Nina period, sometimes you can go from extremely dry air settling in, or you can get into the wet periods. And I think that that is important to note here as we kind of drift into that La Nina period, because I think that the way we've seen things the last year or maybe a little longer is we run into these drought periods where all of a sudden we get all of our rain, and we just got all kinds of moisture. I think we'll probably do that for a brief period through the rest of November. We may be dry, but I do think that we'll get a little more snow than Scott said, a little less than Anthony said. I think we'll still get to 7 below. Like I said, it still gets cold. That's my guess from pretty close to what we had last year. We absolutely do get these Arctic intrusions like Jim mentioned, but most of them are in January when it's supposed to be cold, or early February. As far as the whole team's guess, I'm going to take, this is a little bit more of a guess, and especially we could already have seen an inch of snow. We know that based on historical past. It snows in October, it snows the first part of November. Well, it doesn't matter what time you're watching this, for the most part, over the next week or two after we tape this in the middle of November. It's not snowing. But Scott's guess for the first inch of snow in St. Louis is January 8th. Anthony's was December 11th. Jim with January 11th, so the 11ths are right on trend. Tracy is hammering in the snow day on December 2nd. She wants early snow. I personally don't see how that's going to be the case, but perhaps, maybe not in time for a white Christmas, but December 28th. What are your guesses? We'd love to see them, and don't worry about asking us a question, because we'd be happy to answer it at any point. So if you've watched this some 30-minute special, we appreciate you. Ask a question, add your guess. When do you think the first inch of snow will fall in St. Louis? Right now, I don't think it's over the next 7 days, but we'll keep you posted on that. And we thank you for watching the special. We hope you learned a little something, and we'll try to keep you posted here as we head into the rest of the winter, whether it's cold, warm, or a little bit of both.